This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome to the show. It is Tuesday, and of course, that is my weekly sit-down with Eric Peters from Eric Peters Autos. Eric, how are you today?
I'm okay. You know, I don't know whether you were following it, but I am dealing with the loss of our dog that got hit by a car the other day.
Oh, dude, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, that was unexpected, and it's been a little bit difficult.
Understandably, and you know, I don't mean to put you through the emotional ringer, but I never understood how much pets were a part of the family until I was gone as I was serving a mission for my church, and so I was far from home, and just got a letter from my mom mentioning, oh, by the way, our dog Trixie passed away, and suddenly I'm weeping, and my mission companion's looking at me going, dude, what's wrong? And I'm just, our dog died, and he's like, oh, dude, I understand. They're like family, but I don't think I had ever really felt it until that point. So my condolences to you.
Yeah, thank you. You know, it was interesting in a way in that, kind of like Charlie Kirk's death, it was totally out of the blue and unexpected. You know, our dog was not even 3 years old when this happened. So, you know, it's different when they're old and you anticipate it and, you know, you can prepare for it. And this was not like that. So I wrote a little article about that, which if people are interested, they can get into. But before I get too upset about it, maybe we should just talk about the ever elaborating Charlie Kirk thing instead.
Yeah, let's talk about some feel good stuff. Okay, well, yeah. maybe not, but okay. I have to admit, I didn't watch the whole Charlie Kirk service. It sounds like it was kind of an all day thing, but I actually was kind of impressed with a couple of things there. The number of people who showed up, and I'm not just talking the politicos who were getting some camera time, but the number of just average Americans who made a journey to Glendale, Arizona, and, you know, were there. I mean, last I heard, there was somewhere in the neighborhood of between 100 and 300,000 and over 100 million views online.
Yeah, the thing that interested me even more than that, though, was an interview that Trump gave in the days after Kirk's murder, in which he was asked, and I was proud of the reporter for asking this, whether Trump recognized or shared the concerns of people, particularly his supporters, that this was going to be used as a pretext to clamp down on free speech. You know, ostensibly hate speech, ironically, the right is now talking about hate speech in the manner that the left did to suppress our ability to speak freely. And Trump's comment was really, in my opinion, alarming and callous. You know, he said something about Charlie Kirk to the effect that, well, I wonder if he feels the same way now about free speech. Ooh. You know, and it hit me like a baseball bat to the side of the head, because I think if anybody on the left had said something similar, you know, a political figure had said something like that in the same context, there would have been a lot of righteous outrage directed at the president for having said that. And there should be. That was a despicable comment, in my view. And in my opinion, it gives us another little hint at his authoritarian instincts. We saw it with Pam Bondi, too, his attorney general. And we saw it reflected in the fact that Trump did not immediately chasten or better yet, fire that woman after she started talking about how the federal government was going to go after, her words, people that they deem guilty of quote unquote hate speech. Really, really worrisome stuff.
I have to say, though, I was somewhat encouraged, at least by the number of people, either on the right or the libertarian right, who immediately spoke up and said about correcting Pam Bondi, saying, look, there is no such thing as hate speech.
Yeah, me too.
It's all free speech, and, you know, you don't try to partition out some as, well, it's unpleasant, therefore we must outlaw it. That's a no-starter.
You know, one of the great insights that a lot of the founding fathers had was that we recognize humans are motivated by self-interest, for good and for bad. And it is in our interests as conservatives, as libertarians, to not grant to the federal government the power to police speech in any way, shape, or form, to even characterize it as quote unquote hate speech. You know, this is an authoritarian, totalitarian term that they dredge up to try to gaslight people for saying or writing things that they don't approve of. You know, you're either free to speak or you're not, and hate doesn't enter into it. They're trying to impugn your motives in order to avoid having to address your questions.
It was kind of refreshing to see Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica, publicly forgive his killer, which is, I know some people are like, oh, that's rolling over and being a doormat. I don't agree with that. I don't think she is in any way saying therefore he should not have to face justice for what he's done. But that to me looked like a supremely strong act. Not from the standpoint of she was flexing for us, but I think she showed more strength and more fortitude than most in doing that. And it kind of pains me to hear people start going after her and basically berating her for not being sufficiently filled with bloodlust and a desire to, tear the guy to pieces.
It's appalling to me also. After all, she's the one who lost her husband and a father for their 2 young children. So for other people on the outside who aren't directly affected by that, to question her motives and her decisions with regard to what happened is pretty despicable, in my opinion. The thing, though, that I still have some questions about, and again, I don't know. All I know is that Charlie Kirk is dead. That seems to be the only thing that I know for sure. I continue to be bothered by a couple of things about the events of that day. One of those things is that Bigfoot video. The grainy thing that we see a guy, you can't really see him too clearly, assume it's a guy. We see a person running from the roof, from the supposed scene of the shooting, trying to scramble down the side of that building, holding what appears to be a backpack. I see no rifle in that person's hand. And, we're told that the rifle was broken down and in the backpack, but my understanding is that it's pretty difficult to disassemble a Mauser rifle. You need a particular brace to do it, and tools and all of that. Not to mention the guy just shot somebody. That's what we're told, and he's in a panic to get out of there quickly. So I have trouble understanding how it is that he had the time, not to mention the implements and whatever else was necessary to disassemble.
Fine motor skills.
Yeah, and put it in this backpack and then scramble off the side of the building. And again, I don't know, because I have not been able to get answers to this question. The FBI publishes a photo of the assembled rifle, which they claimed that they found. So if the shooter disassembled it to get out of there and had it in his backpack, we're supposed to believe that he stopped to reassemble it on his way, out. I don't get that. The other thing is, and there are a lot of people who are questioning this. I'm not a ballistics expert. I'm not a firearms expert, but 30-06 is a pretty powerful deer hunting round. And Charlie was apparently hit from less than 200 yards with that weapon. And that weapon can easily drop a deer at 500 yards or even longer than that. And the wound is usually catastrophic for a round that big and that powerful. And it just doesn't make sense to me. We've all seen the video of something hitting him here, or appears to hitting him here, and a gout of blood gushing out. But his body isn't like violently thrown back. He falls back in apparent reaction to being hit, but it's not the same as the ballistic impact of a high-powered rifle round. And there does not appear to be spatter from an exit wound either. And then we're told by the physician, and again, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me that Charlie's enormously healthy neck somehow stopped a 30-06 round and prevented it from exiting his body. And I'm not comfortable with that. I haven't had good answers to those questions yet.
Definitely there are more questions than answers, and I don't even want to take a guess at it. I'm a fairly experienced shooter. I have been hand loading, and I have a surface level knowledge of ballistics, and I know sometimes bullets behave strangely, and rounds that should have completely gone through, like a large game animal like an elk, will be found resting just under the skin, which is apparently what the doctor is saying. They found the bullet just under the skin in Charlie's neck. I'm not sure. I'm still trying to get my mind around, though, the person who stands accused of it. I'm going back to the love letters or the text between him and his roommate, and that just doesn't sound like a 22-year-old wrote those. I mean, the only thing he was missing from those texts were words like "forsooth" and "methinks." It just really seemed out of character.
Dawn and I were talking about it, and she has children who are roughly that age. And children in that age group, Gen Z people, they don't use that kind of language. I asked her about it. Have you ever had one of your kids say vehicle? That was one of the terms used in this note. They don't speak that way. So it's odd, And another thing that's striking me as odd and making me feel very creepy, it seems like all of a sudden it's time to drive on, doesn't it? Just like after the Trump assassination, any more information about that kid who supposedly took the shot at Trump, it's just like, oh, who cares? No, no, we're not interested in that anymore. I've not seen anything in the news about, further details about this kid, about his background, about his politics, about things that might have been precursors to this, let alone his supposed furry boyfriend. It's like a narrative was created and dumped, and now it's time for us to move on again.
Yeah, I have a really dear friend who we talk on a daily basis, or we text on a daily basis, and we've been trying to reason this out too. And some of the theories that have come out, well, Charlie was wearing a plate and the bullet splashed up and cut his neck, or somebody has actually advanced. He had an exploding microphone. It's like, really, where have we heard that before? Pagers? I don't know.
Yeah,
it's like we've deliberately been given so much slop that it's impossible to know what is true and what isn't, almost as if that was the design.
Oh, absolutely. It's very frustrating to not be able to tell truth from falsehoods. But, you can also use the old detective standard of who benefits, who benefited from Kirk's death. My understanding is that, he was kind of going off the reservation with regard to the neocon agenda, the Israeli Zionist agenda. And indeed that, and I haven't been able to verify this, but supposedly not only was he invited to Israel by Netanyahu, but Netanyahu promised to dole out to him and his Turning Point USA thing, something like $150 million. Now, again, I don't know whether that's true, but he was supposedly had that dangled in front of him if he would essentially shut up, about what's going on over there and toe the line. And he apparently expressed to a number of people who are close to him, and also Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and some other people, that he felt scared about the consequences of his beginning to question some of these things. And to me, it fits in with his personality. He seemed to be a guy who was genuinely interested in exploring the issues. And in other words, he wasn't just an ideologue who was spouting talking points like Sean Hannity.
Yep.
He seemed to be a decent dude who just wanted to find out, okay, well, so what's the deal here? What are we really talking about? And that made him dangerous, I think, because he was an independent-minded thinker, and he did have this enormous audience, and particularly with the Gen Zs, the high school and college-age kids out there. And, if he was beginning to question the narrative with regard to the Zionist project and Greater Israel and all of this, that could very well have been lethal. And again, I know some people listening to us will think that I'm kind of going off the reservation a little bit here myself, but consider the Israeli government and what we know that they've been capable of doing. How about that pager attack where they indiscriminately blew up lots of people in order to get at people that they considered to be their political opponents, and never mind the consequences. And most recently, this attack in Qatar, where they just decided to blow up a building because they wanted to get some people. So they have a track record of doing this. It's not really a wild, crazy thing to suggest that they might have been involved in this somehow. And again, I don't know, but I'm not going to be satisfied about it until I have answers that make sense. Just the same with regard to the Epstein thing. I'm not going to shut up about that either.
Yeah, I think you nailed it when you said suddenly it's like, well, we're moving on now, and I'm not ready to move on. I still would like to know what's going on. I will say this: there is a certain satisfaction. I think the Germans call it Schadenfreude or whatever that comes from seeing the left and the people who were foisting cancel culture on everybody else over the last 10 years or so. It's kind of interesting to see them being hoisted on their own petard for the incredibly insensitive statements they've made, about Charlie Kirk. I mean, they don't even wait till the guy's buried and they're like, urinating on his grave, figuratively. It's just
I agree with you.
disgusting.
And it's in bad taste, but we really have got to be careful about this. And I bet you're going to agree with me on this, I was very bothered by Trump sicking the FCC on Jimmy Kimmel. I don't like Jimmy Kimmel. I think he's a tool. I think he's not funny. But, his show should only be canceled by the people who pay to put the show out there if the ratings suck. The idea that we're going to use the federal government's power to push people off the radio, what happens to him could happen to you and could happen to me. It's un-American at a very, very deep and profound level. If we get to that point, we've lost the country.
I thought it was also encouraging, and I'm saying this as I'm a believer, and so to see some of the acknowledgement of Charlie Kirk's faith at that memorial service, I felt like people felt free to express themselves, in terms of their faith, more free than they have felt in a long time. At the same time, I'm kind of holding myself a little bit in reserve because it is such a spectacle and so moving on so many levels that there's a part of me that has to ask, is there a psyop at work here? Because if not, it's missing a great opportunity. And I mean, no disrespect to Charlie Kirk or his widow or any of the people who, expressed, their appreciation for him or his courage. I just am saying there was so much production value that a part of me is like, wow, this is really hitting the heart.
Me also, he's being martyred, and I don't think he'd want that himself. He's being created into sort of a figure, around which an authoritarian regime could wrap itself, and in a way that Charlie Kirk would not have approved of, I don't think. And that's worrisome. We have to be very careful about that. Absolutely, what happened to him was a horrific thing, and that sort of thing is something that should never be countenanced in our society or any free society. But the idea that we're not allowed now to speak ill of somebody, again, poor taste. I would never say anything about him or any other person who'd been publicly shot in the way that he was shot, just out of respect to his memory and respect to his family, because, I'd like to think I've got a degree of civility in me. But if somebody else wants to say it, well, that's their right. As much as I think it's crass, vulgar, obnoxious, that's their right to say it. And I think it's very important that we defend that right, even though it's distasteful to us.
Yep. There are other ways than government to handle that. And I mean, I'm not Amish, but, shun the people that behave disrespectfully like that. Sure. For instance, the word was, Jimmy Kimmel's back on the air as of tonight. And I'm like, that's great. I can go back to not watching him just like before.
Perfect.
Wonderful.
Well said. I'm not a big fan of Howard Stern. People who are familiar with his show will probably know why. But I agree with the man in one way. He used to complain constantly about the FCC and about people who are trying to force his employers to take him off the air. And he would say, turn the station, change the channel, shut it off. If you don't like what I'm doing, you don't have to listen to. Nobody's putting a gun to your head and making you listen to the Howard Stern show. And he's right. He's absolutely right. Nobody's making you or me watch Jimmy Kimmel. So we just don't watch him. And, if enough people do that, then he doesn't got advertisers and he hasn't got an audience, and nobody's going to pay him to stand there on the stage with crickets playing in the background.
Well, and I think it says something for how centered a person is, or how well they know what their core beliefs are and who they are and what they stand for. If you fly off the handle when someone offers insult, that doesn't speak well to how settled you are as a person. In other words, that shows a fragility that might need some work. I look at these young urban youth who there's a certain word beginning with the letter N. They hear it, and it's like it's like flipping a switch. They have to chimp out. They have to beat somebody, stab somebody, shoot somebody for this perceived disrespect. Whereas a person who actually is standing on solid ground and is not miserable or unhappy is going to be able to say whatever and move on with their day.
Why would you particularly care about what some random stranger thinks of you?
Bingo. Yep. Well, and I know that puts a big burden on each one of us, because the one thing we have control over is how do we choose to react. And I'm just going to offer this for what it's worth. People may hate me for saying it, but just because someone offers you an insult doesn't mean you have to accept it.
Right. And at a core level, whether it's true, right? And if it isn't, why would it bother you? Somebody name calls you, they call you a phobe or a hater or whatever. And in your heart that you're not that way. So it's very easy to just dismiss internally whatever that they're trying to accuse you of and drive on.
In fact, truth be told, I aspire to certain labels. If someone were to call me a wrong thinker, I would beam. Like, thank you. Really? Yeah. You noticed?
Yeah.
That's
an astonishing thing too. It brings me back to the pandemic days. And I really used to wrestle with this internally and think, what is wrong with these people? Like, I have no issue with anybody else who wants to wear a mask or stay home or do whatever they feel they need to do in order to cope with this situation. I don't understand why they feel they have to force me to go along with whatever it is they think ought to be done. That's like, my whole life I've tried to understand people who don't live and let live. It's like the eternal question for me.
No, it's like I say, it betrays an insecurity that is very unbecoming of an adult. And I know I've been guilty of it too, where somebody says something and I'm like, ooh, that rubs me the wrong way. But if I choose to react, with all kinds of outrage, I chose to react like that. And I really shouldn't try to absolve myself of responsibility and pretend, well, there's nothing I can do about it. I have to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it creates in the minds of the people who are afflicted by this, as you say, this fragility, this brittleness, that they can't function. They hear something that they don't like. They come across something that they don't like. And instead of just dealing with it, that's part of life. Life is full of things we don't like that happen. You just have to, as an adult, learn how to cope with it and handle it and move on. But these people can't. And, they're stuck in a kind of perpetual state of infancy. Like a little kid gets immediately frustrated, starts to cry and act out. And that's really what defines a child. It's not so much how big they are, it's how much they've developed emotionally down the line.
Hear, hear. All right, we're down to a couple minutes left here, Eric. I got to ask you, what's on your radar screen automotively?
Oh, something really interesting. You remember when Toyota was kind of the go-to brand for reliability?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I still tend to think of them as, it's a Toyota. That thing's going to last forever.
They're having another problem, and it's a problem that's afflicting the entire industry. They've had to recall about 500,000 vehicles because touchscreens go dark.
Gee.
And the thing it is with these touchscreens, a lot of people are not familiar with them. A lot of the controls that were formerly controlled by knobs and switches and buttons to operate things like your stereo and your air conditioning and so on are now integrated into this touchscreen. So when the touchscreen goes out on you, everything goes out on you, and the car's basically not usable at that point. And these are brand new cars. So what happens, 7, 8, 9 years from now, when these things are out of warranty and these touchscreens have been out there getting jostled by potholes and, sitting in 100-degree heat outside and then 15-degree cold in the winter, and they break and they go out on you. It's like literally a ticking time bomb financially in your vehicle when these things go out. And I think it's a very bad idea. The entire industry has been given over to these touchscreens now. Something that used to be restricted to the very, very high-end cars is now in everything. I've got a $28,000 Kia parked outside that has a full width LCD touchscreen now. They all have it.
And it's impressive to look at until it's not working.
And I don't even think it's impressive to look at anymore. Initially it was. I remember about 10 years ago when they first started appearing in high-end cars like a Mercedes S-Class. And the first time I would see it or show it to people, because they'd never seen it before, outside of Star Trek Enterprise, that's what it looks like, this big flat screen. And they go, wow. Well, it's lost its wow punch because now everything has it. It's kind of like, if you showed a smartphone to somebody 10 years ago, they go, wow, look at what that can do. Now everybody has one. And the cheapest $40 a phone you pick up at Walmart can do pretty much everything that a $1,000 iPod can do. And it's just particularly impressive anymore.
Well, another reason I'm kind of determined to get back to the basics. Simplify, man. Simplify. Yeah. That's becoming my mantra. Eric,
and it's a good mantra to have.
Great to visit with you as always. Again, my condolences for your dog.
Yeah. Thank you.
Look forward to our talk next week. Hopefully it's a rather uneventful time between now and then.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.